evening from India to all of you and to all our listeners who have taken the time to tune in to the fifth edition of the Radio Festival, which we have organized in this year, where we have seen a number of climate threats, and we have all felt the impact of climate change on our lives very personally. So I'm very, very thrilled that today we have this panel wherein we have people joining us from literally all over the world, from Canada, from Mexico, from England. And today we are here to talk about climate change and storytelling. And very, very happy that it is being hosted by Prabjeet. I'll just introduce her and then hand over the session to her. So Prabjeet Bains is a producer in formats and innovation in BBC Sounds, where she leads digital transformation projects and explores innovations in audio. She develops new podcasts in the BBC and is a podcast consultant for those from diverse backgrounds outside of it. So thank you so much, Prab, for making the time and putting this whole panel together. All credits to you. And I now hand over the floor to you. Let's take it from there. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Nitika, for a lovely introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us to listen into eco-storytelling for podcasting and for change making. Now, before we begin, I would just like to invite the panelists to take a deep breath. We're all coming from different parts of the world in loads of different situations. So feel free to close your eyes and take in that deep breath. Put the nerves aside, and remember, channel the voices that we're here to represent today, and think consciously about the other the other panelists on this session as well. And remember that there is, enough space for all of us. So I hope you remember those elements as we go through the session. And I want to basically open this out, to the audience in terms of, whether you're a podcaster or you're aspiring to be one, or you are nothing to do with podcasting and you might work in environmental industries, or you don't, you just work in an organization that has nothing to do with, the environment. I think there's some stories here in this session for you. And we've got some great folk joining us to share their stories and share how they also tell their own stories. With us today, we have Tabitha Mortipoy, who is a British writer for the award-winning podcast Life Sentence, a thought-provoking podcast that uses immersive sound and stories to bring to life the climate crisis. And we also have Daniela Matic, a duo of award-winning Mexican and Colombian producers and presenters of Radio Savia, a bi-monthly podcast that features everyone from farmers to Latin American women who are activists and healers. And then finally, we also have with us Zidhan Munshi, an Indian social entrepreneur who produces and presents Sustainability Simplified, a podcast on sharing the best practices of sustainable businesses. Now, before we get into their stories, I'd like you to indulge me for a moment, and I'd like to share with you a story. And it's about village cattle farmers. There's a guy called Thomas, and he used to live in a village and had a cow. So he went, and told the cows that he could go and graze in what's called a common. It's a green pasture that belongs to the land that belongs to the entire village. And, the cow was having an absolute brilliant time. There was just huge bunches of grass that it would chew on, and it could frolic away in the field as much as it liked. And all of its four stomachs were completely full of food. So it was having an amazing time and producing lots of milk, and Tom was pretty happy. So Thomas was like, well, you know what? I'm going to get some more cows. Why not have make the most of the situation? So he bought some more cows. And had a whole cattle, a group of cattle grazing this field. Now, a fellow villager saw this and I was like, well, Thomas is doing pretty well with all of his cows and is bringing in the dough. So why don't I do the same? So he kind of also bought a bunch of cows and let them go to the field. Now, the cows may have doubled in number, but it was still okay. Everyone still had enough to eat, although maybe if the 4 stomachs had gone down to 2 stomachs being full, but there was, enough grass to go around for everyone. And this, went on for a while, and Thomas and Harry were pretty happy. However, there was another villager called Richard, and he was like, you know what? I would love to get in on whatever they're having. So he kind of also brought some cattle and let them loose on the field. And now we had a bit of a problem. Now we had too many cows and they're all kind of, jostling for a bit of space, and, there's not much grass left to eat. They're going hungry. They're getting skinnier, and they're starting to elbow each other and saying, move out of the way. And the other one saying, no, you move out of the way. And essentially you have a cow battle, right? And that's how, it escalated, and the cow battle was fought and lost within a short space of time. And now this is a kind of, maybe I might have lied a bit about the kind of cow battle. That didn't really happen. But this is a common story that we hear with our resources around the planet all the time. We hear about the kind of depletion of resources. And this is a popular theory that was put forward and popularized by a kind of American ecologist. And his name was Garrett Hardin. Now, obviously, things have progressed from that kind of village level to global tragedies at a much bigger scale. We're talking not just overgrazing, we're talking about overfishing, we're talking about deforestation, we're talking about kind of mass extinctions and depletion of resources. And, sometimes I think that the scale of the problem can feel quite paralyzing. And it's not just a scale of the problem, it's also the frequency at which these calamities are arriving. It can kind of feel very overwhelming. We either do one or two things, which is to endlessly doom scroll our phones looking for, doom and gloom stories, which cause us lots of eco-anxiety, or we're kind of switching off, right? We're just saying this is too much. We can't take any more of this in. So, it feels like the science is galloping ahead with our heads, but our hearts are kind of being left a little behind. And what I want to do is play for you a little clip of audio that has a bit of heart, that does a little something to kind of inject that kind of feeling back into our wide minds and our kind of consciousness. So give me a short moment, and I will play this bit of audio.
There is a kind of hunger that I hope you never know. The kind that claws at your belly. The kind that gnashes at your ribcage like a hot, livid rage. Maut vargi bhukh. To me, the strangest thing, the saddest thing, the most inexplicable, risible thing is that from the very beginning of time, you have made utter gods out of me and my kind. You have treated me like a talisman. Ik devte vang. I am your amber-bellied king. I am the hot light of yang to your dark, earthy yin. I am a solar beam of strength and fire. I'm a thing loved to death. A thing killed with desire. In China, I am power. In stories, I am the king of the mountain. But in life, I am the bloody ghost of regicide. I am so loved, so revered, so adored and so feared that my bones and my teeth and my hide are stolen to ward off the evil eye. And India, here, I have fought to survive. Since a time long ago, and one man, Robert Clive.
After the fall of Bristol's notorious Edward Colston statue, campaigners are calling for the removal of the statue of Robert Clive, the figurehead of Britain's imperial rule in
Right. Hopefully you heard a little bit of that clip, and one of you will be very, very familiar with that, and that's kind of Tabitha, who was behind the writing of that podcast. Now, I want to ask, when it comes to a long form narrative podcast about the global climate crisis, which can be a bit of an overwhelming topic to tackle, as we just said. Where do you even start? How did you decide which stories to tell?
That's a good question. It was a huge idea. It wasn't my idea. It was conceived by a creative producer, and I was brought on to write the scripts. And when they pitched it to me, they said, we want to create a show about the climate emergency, but we want to tell stories, and we want this to be a kind of a piece of poetry and a piece of kind of beautiful sound design. And it was a very kind of a nebulous idea. And they said, we want you to write 7 episodes of this thing. And it was gigantic, right? It's as you mentioned before, it's one of these things that's so huge. It's a struggle sometimes to think, how do we formalize that? What format do we use? How do we break it down? And we agreed that the way to do it, again, as you said, was to think about the heart more than the head, and to we wanted to kind of visit animals. We thought that they were kind of one of the most, the most kind of silenced victims of the climate emergency. We can't kind of give them voice very easily, and so but with artistic license, we thought maybe we could kind of go and kind of speak to animals and kind of hear their experience of the climate emergency. So which was the idea, which is, again, kind of sounds difficult to do, but that's what we were aiming for, to try and get people to kind of connect with the kind of non-human inhabitants of the earth.
Yeah, definitely a huge challenge. And I kind of also would invite very briefly kind of Zidane and kind of Daniela Maitik to say, how did you choose the stories that you kind of went off and kind of chose? So Zidane, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So for me, I think, because my podcast niche is very, very clear and very, very pinpointed to who are those, entrepreneurs who are creating that kind of an environmental or societal change, whether it's through their products or through their services or through certain functional aspects. So I basically hunt down for only those people who are in this space specifically, and try and show those kind of stories through my podcast, because that's really the focus. So it's agnostic in terms of sector. Happy to kind of engage with all types of people out there, but that's really how I choose it. It's really based on the niche. Yeah.
Interesting. So we've got animals and we've got people focusing on entrepreneurs. How about you, Daniela and Maitik?
Well, we are from, Daniela from Mexico, I'm from Colombia, and we are very close to communities and to activists, like more grassroots organizations and a movement. And for us, it's very clear that the problem doesn't come from the villages, the problem doesn't come from communities, but it comes from corporations, it comes from an extractive system. And for us, the solutions can come from the communities, and the solutions come from women that are already doing caring for their community, caring for their territory, and also trying to resist to the invasion of their lands and to the invasion and to the extraction of their resources. So for us, it was more like from coming from that background and from that understanding, we focus on women land defenders that are also trying to find ways to heal from the wounds that already are on the social tissue. That for us, the social tissue is a connection between between the land and the people and the community. Like it's also, our approach is very communal based, and so that's how it came to life now, and that's also like recognizing that there are already wounds in the system, but there are also superpowers in the communities, and they are very diverse, and that the part of the solution to the crisis is diversity and the plurality of voices that are resisting from the communities and from the lands.
That is a really interesting point about kind of where the solutions come from, and we'll touch on that a lot more around the diversity of voices. But actually, I just want to kind of think about some of the kind of people that we try to center in these podcasts, because it's not conventional, right? These people aren't normally at the center of storytelling in mainstream kind of media. So again, I kind of want to kind of come back to you, Tabitha. You kind of, the way that you use animals, and then also the names that you gave them was quite interesting. So how did you choose the kind of names and the centering of these kind of characters?
I think, language is so powerful, isn't it, in our construction of reality and our construction of meaning. And even giving names to animals, I think it kind of it asks us to recognize that they are sentient beings. I think we're so human centric in the way that we kind of perceive our surroundings, and that's a huge part of the problem, isn't it? That's kind of how we got to where we are, is that we don't hold in mind a sense of kind of responsibility to the climate and to the other animals that we share the planet with, and we don't think of ourselves as animals. We've created this kind of artificial division between ourselves and the other beings that we share the earth with. So we thought, well, we have to name our characters, we have to hear them speak, and dissolving the idea of time. And it was all kind of experimental, trying to kind of just expand our scope and kind of break down the traditional ways in which we think about the world, because they're obviously not doing us any favors.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of, I think that the word is animism, which is like bringing kind of spirit of things into animals, and realizing, like you said, just as that we are the same as well. And one thing that I thought was done beautifully, for example, you just mentioned there that the kind of goddess kind of the ocean, or Nep, as one of the characters. That was really interesting that you casted an Indian female voice who was kind of like almost a auntie character, if you like. Sindhuvi, I think, was cast for it, and I thought it was just done really, really nice. I think when we talk about tired narratives, it can sometimes feel quite preachy, but I thought one of the things that I really enjoyed about Life Sentence was that actually you took that kind of preachy thing about the environment and how we should behave, and turn it to quite a playful relationship between a Indian auntie and her niece, I think was like Coral, and that's a beautiful dynamic that I heard play out, which is really lovely. We as humans, we really look after our family, right? That's kind of hardwired into us. So if we can extend the idea of family and think maybe we're related to our planet Earth and to the other animals that we share it with, then we're more incentivized to be kind to them and to be kind of conscious of their needs and their struggles. So we wanted. Yeah, no, that's a really kind of a theme that's kind of thread throughout the whole series, which is beautiful. Another thing that is a bit of a bugbear, and this, I'm going to come to you for this one, is when it comes to terminology, sometimes we get stuck with big words, and that's definitely the case for the corporate sector. How do you avoid that kind of jargon in your podcasts?
Sure. So starting with the name of my podcast, it is Sustainability Simplified, because, the idea is to kind of break it down and say that, hey, sustainability is what we've actually been doing all our lives, especially in the Indian context, right? It comes very naturally to us to, just a simple example, since times immemorial, like since I was a child, my father used to, I would have that toothpaste, and that toothpaste is, used, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, we need to dispose it. No, he'll cut it. He'll try to remove a lot more and keep using it for the next 3 or 4 days. So it comes very naturally to us in the Indian context. But when we look at how we want to construct it for businesses and their disclosures and their reporting cycles, we try to make it complicated just so that it looks very technical and things like that. But actually, it's a very simple thing. It is just you need to care for society, you need to care for the environment so that your business stays alive. I mean, if the environment is going to go crippling, you have 40 degrees Celsius in the UK and things like that, and there are forest fires across the world, etc., etc. How is your business even going to survive, right? So it's a very simple thing. But yeah, I think what I try to do is that try to keep a free-flowing conversation with the entrepreneur so that they are trying to tell their story of where they got inspired to start their business. And that naturally avoids, complicated terminologies. They just get into a cycle of they're just narrating their own personal story and how they really started their, enterprise. So, it just flows that way. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's a very different contrast to stories in terms of like, here we have stories of animals, here we have the story of kind of personal stories. But with Radio Savia, actually, it's a very different type of storytelling. You kind of intentionally craft a real space for the kind of storytelling to happen from the community. Can you tell me about how you do that?
Yeah, well, we focus a lot on sound because we believe that like podcast, it goes through sound, and for us it's important to honor that and to honor also the interaction between humans and their environment
So yes, as Maitik was saying, we honor a lot the sound and the sound of the communities and also the sound of the territories. No, here in Latin America, the territories are a very important concept and word, and a lived word also, like how is lived, how we relate with our environment, and how our environment is really important to craft our daily life, and also like to shape our daily lives. No, so in that kind of also thinking, we honor a lot the sounds of the territories, the music of the territories, and how we can also weave our voices with the voices of the interviewees and with the sounds of the landscape, the soundscapes, that we also create. So that is one thing that we do, and we also like try, I think, we have been learning also what is our voice and what is our role in that storytelling, because it's also really important for us like to put in the front the stories of these women and their communities and the sounds of the territories. So then what should Maitik and Daniela do in that scenario? And that is also part of what we have been learning, and that we try also to be transparent about our process while we are doing the podcast.
And one last thing, really short, is that we believe that listening is political, and a lot of what is for us is really important to create listening spaces and to be very intentional about the space of listening that it requires to that the world and the communities and the solutions need. No, they need a listening space that honors their voices, and not that they're fighting for them for being listened to.
Yeah, absolutely. That is magic. And I can hear some of that magic when I listen to your podcast. Even though I don't kind of fully understand Spanish, I take all the transcriptions and I translate them using a website. But you can really hear it. And I would love to play a short extract from one of your interviews.
Ahora voy a ir a dormir y amanezco y otra vez agradezco eso y vuelvo, porque eso un día no sucederá. Pero mientras tanto, tengo que tener esa atención y ofrendarle, ¿verdad? Ofrendarle a la Mapu, darle no solo mi canto y la energía, darle de beber, darle de comer, a lo mejor un pichintún, una pequeñez, quizá el mate que voy a tomar, le voy a ofrecer el primer mate a ella. Y eso es lo que sacamos también allí, un momentito. Entonces uno dice, ayuda, pide ayuda, ¿no? ¿Ayuda a qué? A seguir estando, a seguir viviendo, a seguir durando en estas condiciones. Bueno, puede hacer entonar way, 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 way. Whoa, 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 whoa.
Great. Thank you for that lovely bit of audio that kind of always makes my kind of hair on the end stand on the end. And when I kind of looked at the translations deeply, it was really interesting that Beatrice, the kind of contributor there, was so in touch with the kind of like with the land and kind of with the environment that she kind of almost is the one listening to it as well, right? Here she's like, I will sing to the land. So could you tell me a little bit about kind of Beatrice and her relationship and how you brought that to life?
Yeah, I think Beatrice, she is from Mapuche land in Argentina also, and she's like a knowledge keeper and also like a song keeper. How would you say? Yeah. And she also like relates a lot about her story and how she discovered also her identity in a land where indigenous people have been exterminated. And also how this relationship with nature and the sounds of nature like gave her also a way to get in touch with her and with her spirituality and with her ancestors. And she also like it's an indigenous also tradition for her like to keep these sounds of nature through her voice also. No, she talks a lot about find the voice and the natures of sound in her own voice. So that is one of her processes that she tells about in the podcast. I don't know if
yeah, no, basically that.
Yeah, so that's really interesting in terms of how you kind of bringing in guests who kind of are actually from kind of marginalized voices and have suffered the effects of kind of the globalized world. What I'm curious about is you also kind of explore a slightly more kind of decolonial kind of conversation. And that's something that actually all of our podcasters do. But Radio Savia, you kind of take a very intentional stance on this. I'm kind of wondering, how do you explore the relationship between kind of, as you mentioned, extractive kind of practices and the communities that you want to kind of amplify?
Well, it's from different, like, even from the start, like, we try also not to do extractive storytelling. I think we believe that it's really important to focus on the bonds and the relationship between us and the communities and us and the interviewees. So that's a first thing. I think that on the other side, also women and especially women land defenders are really threatened by their political activities and by their environmental activism, and for us it's really important also to give this listening space for their, not so much, and so when they are appear in the media, their narratives are really victimized, and it's not, for us it's really important to give a space of listening to what is important for them, no, for what they believe. That's part of the colonizing, for us, the colonizing narratives as well, is trying to honor what is important for people and what is important for communities and what they believe on, and to give space to that. And also another part that for us is to center life in the narratives. Like we are also very overwhelmed and very exhausted of listening to narratives that just focus on the crisis, but don't focus on the power that we have to overcome this, and that don't focus on the importance of life for us, and that we fight for life, and we fight for the land because it's part of us, but also because we enjoy being alive, and also because we enjoy enjoy our land. No? So I think that recovering joy and recovering and honoring pleasure, the pleasure that is to be alive, is also part of decolonizing these narratives that always takes us as victims, and that take from us the power and the connection, the true connection that we have with our ancestors, with our history, with our memory, and with our way of being alive. No, that there are multiple ways of living in this planet, and that's also very important for us to honor, and it's part of decolonizing the narratives that are that victimize us and that put us in a and that try to homogenize the ways that we live.
Just to add, also we try also to put in the front also all the knowledge that is being put in the center to fight and to confront this crisis that is already happening in these communities. And I think to decolonize narratives is also to be open to hear a different kind of stories, a different kind of storytelling that puts in the front also what Maitik said, no, life, the solutions that are being put in the communities, and also the sounds, no, of the soundscape, of the music, of like to open to all the human and not non-human narratives that are part of this storytelling also.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me something, Tabitha, that you might have involved in writing for Life Sentence is that I think the opening is like around how we greet people, right? Around using time of day. Could you kind of add to that by telling me how you thought of that and kind of, how that came to be? Oh, you're on mute. You're on, yeah.
Again, it was sort of in a similar vein to the idea of kind of naming animals and listening to animals. I love what Maitik said about listening being political, and so part of what we wanted to do was kind of reimagine the way that we understand the world and the way that we kind of go through the world. And so we tried to think of kind of everyday examples of how we really kind of flattened the beautiful kind of complexity of the world around us. And one of the things we thought is in England, in English, often the greeting that we would give to one another is to name the time of day. We say morning or afternoon or evening. And it's a very kind of rigid, kind of ridiculous system of kind of existing that's really kind of penned in with all of these kind of restrictive and often very kind of capitalist ways of thinking and being. And we thought, wouldn't it be nicer if you met someone in the street and you exclaimed about the fact that you both exist and you're both alive and you're both kind of treading, standing on the same piece of earth. And if you were kind of more alive to the beauty of what's around you rather than being kind of, head down in this kind of treadmill system of just kind of passing through time rather than kind of really relishing the world around you. And it's as the girl at Radio Savia was saying, finding the joy and the hope and the beauty around you is one way of unlocking the kind of paralysis and the fear and the kind of freeze response that people feel when they're confronted with the emergency. And if we can shift people from the freeze position to the stand up and fight position, then I think we've done well.
Absolutely. I think they'll kind of touch on stories of hope in a moment when we kind of start talking to Zidane. But before I do, I just want to ask Radio Savia and then Maitik and Daniela another question around kind of how have you found centering kind of women healers and activists in the middle of these stories? Or how have you found feminist storytelling to yield different results from what you hear out there when it comes to environmental storytelling?
Just to clarify, the question is about having women as the protagonist of the stories.
Yeah, so how does feminist storytelling shape environmental storytelling?
Yeah.
To start, I think one of the things that we wanted to do with the podcast is to build a bridge between the environmental justice movement and feminist movement, because we also think that is like a really important part of the thing, like to stop seeing apart all these movements and to start building bridges between them, no? And I will also question this feminist storytelling, because I don't think we have a feminist storytelling kind of approach. We also one of our big question is, how is feminism translating into communities, and is this a really important word, or it doesn't say anything to these women that in an Occidental kind of way of seeing things, they are very feminist, but they don't assume as feminist, or they don't relate with white feminism, and they are trying to relate in another way of with another feminism, like communitarian feminism or like anti-racist feminism. So that is a big question, like how are the feminist movement being lived in communities? And there are a lot of feminism movements, no, in the region.
Yeah, and part of that as well is recognizing that we talk about patriarchy, and that definitely patriarchy is part of the problem of the crisis that we are involved in, and we recognize that in the storytelling and in the interviews, and that's why we decided to focus on women, because we live in a society that invisibilizes the voices of women, and that don't give space to the voices of women, and it's necessary also to recognize that patriarchy is part of the problem, and that is something that also something that has been really interesting for us is that this kind of storytelling is really needed somehow. Like a lot of people really is asking for it to be able to listen more to the voices of women, and also to recognize the diversity of perspectives that women can bring, no, to the diversity of perspectives that women bring to speaking about solutions of the crisis.
And also one thing that I just wanted to add is that we talk about care and community care, and we have like the voices are from women in these communities, but we don't want to accentuate that women have to care for the world. We don't want to reproduce that discourse. We believe that men are also a part of the solution, and communities are made from women, men, and all the diversity of beings, and we believe that community care has to come from the communities. The only thing is that women are leading a lot of these important processes also, no? But we want, I just wanted to clarify that.
So just to synthesize, amplify the understanding of feminism and amplify the understanding of care. No, it's not just the care of the house, but also we talk here the small house that where you live, and the big house that is the planet and is the land. So like that care is part of the responsibility that we all have as humans.
I think emphasis on all, but also like you said, kind of it sounds like you're kind of diversifying the definition of feminism there as well, not just kind of adding diverse stories to the narrative of environmental storytelling. It's kind of widening those definitions to kind of encompass all the kind of communities that you interact with, which kind of also brings me around to the kind of communities that Ziddane's been in, which is kind of might seem as a stark contrast, because Ziddane, you've spent a lot of time at kind of the largest aid agency in the world to kind of large multinational corporations as well, but now kind of do more kind of environmental kind of consulting. So what I'm curious about is, sometimes it might seem like the solution is over there and it's quite easy. If somebody just did that, then it would be fixed. So from your perspective, having been on the other side, what kind of challenges have you observed?
Sure. That's a great question. I think, in my almost decade-long career, more than half of my career life has been spent at, large multinational corporations like Unilever. I've worked with United Nations agencies, with the government, in Northeast India, in Nagaland. So, largely speaking, three challenges really stand out for me, at least in my experience. Or maybe I want to talk about three. There are multiple challenges. One really is, micro level impact. When we talk about large scale organizations and the government, a lot is operating at the macro level, right? So the challenge there is, how do you take that down to every citizen, in case of the government? or let's say every business stakeholder in case of a large corporation. And here I want to kind of push in an example of a tomato ketchup brand. It's called Kisan, and it is manufactured and marketed by Unilever, which is one of the largest fast-moving consumer goods in the world, companies in the world. And what they did was very interesting, where in 2012, Unilever, which is Hindustan Unilever, the Indian arm, they collaborated with the state government of Maharashtra, one of the largest states of India. And what they tried to do was they built a program around how to provide scientific knowledge, which is on sustainable agricultural practices. So the right type of seeds, the right type of fertilizers, the quantity, quality, etc., etc. And then this program actually became self-sustaining from 2015 onwards. So today they are reaching 6,000 farmers directly. They have thousands of farmers they're reaching through suppliers. And why is this good? This is good because it impacts the farmer, right, directly, because the quality and the yield is much higher of the tomatoes. It impacts positively the company because the quality of the ketchup is better. It's good for the consumer, right, because the ketchup becomes healthier for the consumer to consume. And there is a buyback guarantee program that actually occurs between the company and the farmer. So it's a win-win-win kind of a situation. But this is a high-scale program which is touching each farmer. So the question is, how does that micro-level impact from the macro really filter down to each of those people in the space? So that's really one. The second big challenge I would say is, how do we, so looking at the reverse side of things, how do we build participatory models? So we've talked a lot about community care, community stories, community solutions, but how can those new participatory models be encouraged, right, in the business space, for governments, etc. And here I want to just push in an example from all the work that the government of Nagaland, Nagaland is a small state in northeast part of India. And the government there came in, just coincidentally, it was around 2012-13 that they, noticed a lot of not so environmentally friendly practices, which were happening in a conservation area around one of the villages where the Amur falcons actually come to roost for about a month in October. And what they observed was that there was hunting happening. There were not so good environmental practices happening in that region, which is bad for, of course, the environment and, of course, the birds as well who come to roost. And so the Department of Forests came in and said, let's develop a community model here, right? And what was the model? The model was, how do we develop alternative livelihood building mechanisms so that people come in and are able to conserve their space by themselves and at the same time self-sustain their own livelihood, right? So there is a sustainable tourism model around it. And I myself have visited that area, which is basically the roosting site has certain campsites, certain huts, thatched huts, where people can stay and experience nature, firsthand. And this is all run by the people, of the community. So that's again a win-win-win kind of a situation, which is a government coming along with with the community to build those bottom-up models. But how can we really have such participatory models at the community level? And last would be action-led communication. We're talking about storytelling. We're talking about communication here. How do companies or even governments look at governance very seriously? And have specific policies to drive change. So whether it is company level policies, whether it's governmental policies, what are the incentive structures for the policies to function better? And remember that storytelling has an opportunity to give a call to action. So it becomes then action-led communication, right? So that will help to enhance the effectiveness of on-ground implementation of such policies. So I think these are the three, quick challenges that I wanted to say, but also kind of plug in some examples.
Absolutely. And I think, community-based conservation is really, really interesting. It's an interesting model in and of itself that's kind of proven to work quite well and sometimes even more cost effectively. And I think that's another conversation, a story that businesses love hearing as if it's cost effective, right? But I think I actually wanted to play, coincidentally, a clip from your program. And funnily enough, it's about an episode from kind of Nagaland as well. So give me a moment and I will play this.
It would be nice to know what have been some of those challenges and opportunities that both of you might have encountered or explored during the setup and running of Connecting NER.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Jitin, there are challenges and opportunities, and yes, specifically because of the many tribes and sub-tribes that exist in Northeast India. But again, they add to the diversity of India that we're also proud of.
Right.
So that's always going to remain. The opportunity that we saw, we want to begin with that, was that nobody really knows. Even people living in Northeast India, they don't know about the people that are living, in the next state of theirs. So this was our main, ideation for starting Connecting NER also, that, okay, we are a products company, we are selling something, we're selling creativity, etc. But we're also selling a story, because as Ishita mentioned, there are companies, very good companies that are sourcing from Northeast India, but they're not doing the storytelling bit.
Right.
So that is one opportunity that we wanted to explore.
Right.
And then the challenge that has been mostly entrepreneurial challenges, two young girls in this field that is highly unorganized.
Right.
Okay, so hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea of kind of Zitin's podcast as well. And in terms of kind of conversations, I think sometimes stories can be abused as well. I think we talked about extractive storytelling, and this is pretty rife in the commercial space. Greenwashing is a term that's used for companies using storytelling to appear to be eco-friendly. I think, Zitin, what should we be watching out for to detect this kind of abuse of storytelling?
Thanks. That's a great question, and I get asked at multiple occasions the same thing. In fact, on my social media channels as well, I've released videos about greenwashing and rainbow washing as well more recently. And I want to just pause and talk a little bit about rainbow washing for those who may not know about the concept, because the Pride Month just passed by. There are a lot of corporations who are claiming that they are, supporting the LGBTQIA plus community, but they're actually not doing as much. And this could involve, changing their company logos and making it all, rainbow colors, or maybe putting out some few social media posts. But actually, when you look back at their annual report, you'll see that the percentages of, the involvement of those communities is very low. And this runs into point something that low. So from the consumer side of things, or from as an employee perspective, how do we tackle this? We need to keep ourselves informed about some of these, aspects. If you're an prospective employee, you need to do your research well. Is this company doing this stuff? Are they not? Should I be, actually be a part of this journey? As a consumer, you might want to flip the back of pack, might want to, glance through their social media pages or their annual reports to understand a little bit more about what are the kind of, what are the nutritional facts on the products, or where is this product really coming from? The concept of traceability, where you're tracing the origin of where the product really came from. So if we're kind of armed with that information, we're able to take that step forward as well. I just want to take a second to give you an example of how you can build up your consumer awareness as well. There's a portal, it's called Zoobop, ZOOBOP. And Zoobop, basically it's a .com, it's a website which allows you to, and it's specifically for personal care brands. It allows you to search for that personal care brand, and it gives you a rating of, how are they doing on diversity, how are they doing on animal testing, how are they on various aspects of the environment, right? So that arms you with the right information that, okay, I want to type the name of a particular brand name and then get that information. So I'm better prepared when I go to shop the next time. So some of these new models are developing as well to kind of help the consumer on the other side.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of burden, right, on the consumer to be on top of the story, whereas it's okay for companies to do kind of lots of public-facing campaigns. So I'm sure you will keep getting this question until kind of corporations really fix their kind of storytelling kind of models, really. But in terms of, kind of we've talked about responsibility, and we've talked about kind of, at the individual level, what people can do, and, kind of actually at the larger scale end of things with what governments and kind of organizations can do as well. Where do you think kind of like the responsibility of change lies?
Everywhere. I mean, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Those goals are formulated for everybody, and the tagline also says "Leave no one behind," which means that every person is responsible at their end. But I think what we can think of in terms of larger changes, it always starts with one person. It's that one person who thought about an idea or an enterprise, right? And what is an enterprise? It is a solution to a problem. You saw a problem in your community and you said, "Oh, this is a problem. I need to solve it," right? And maybe an enterprise model works good. So when we take individual steps, it all adds up to create a domino effect, around you. And whether it's entrepreneurship or otherwise, I think it just works both ways.
Absolutely. I think you're right with the answer being everyone. And that's something that you do a lot in your podcast, is highlighting those individual entrepreneurial stories, people who have just, had that idea and taken it ahead. Because we still live in a world where there will be organizations and companies and, kind of the environment in conflict with each other. And I think trying to find one fatal answer doesn't quite work. But thank you very much. And what I'd like to do is to conclude by revisiting our earlier story of the tragedy of the commons. And the word tragedy is not lost to me when we're talking about environmental storytelling. And remember we talked about Garrett Hardin, the guy who popularized this theory. Well, a not so fun fact about this guy is that he was focused his career about overpopulation. That led him to come up with some pretty strong stances on anti-immigration. He was partial to a bit of eugenics as well. And like all of these top-down ideologies about control, his other solution to this problem of the tragedy of the commons was like, either you have total privatization or you have total government control. Now, but before Garrett had published his paper, and stacking up all those kind of academic citations, there was another less well-known economist, and she was traveling the world and studying and observing collaborative management systems, right? And had seen the miracle of the commons, right? Very different to the tragedy, the miracle of the commons. And her name was Elena Ostrom. Now, she observed that communities can self-regulate scarce resources to preserve them and their livelihoods within it. Her ideas didn't really embed themselves into the public consciousness as much as Garrett's did, but she was the first female to win a Nobel Prize in economics, and she's criticized for studying different systems. And they, fellow academics will say, well, you don't have one unifying theory, you don't have a unifying universal answer for this. So it's not good enough. She was almost insulted with being too complex, but actually she carried on believing the need for complex collaboration, for complex social science methodology, and for complex stories as well. Now, I think, why does this matter? We might ask that question. And if we have only one narrative, we fall into a danger of oversimplification, right? There isn't a simple story of like the good companies and the bad ones, and good versus evil, or the big versus small, or the one silver bullet that's going to fix everything. Climate change feels impossible because we're putting the entire world's kind of burden on one story to solve everything. And we've been telling ourselves a bit of a tragic story. And what we need right now is an achievable miracle, that miracle of the commons, right? And community, we heard from today, from Radio Sabia, if communities are given their chance, they have their own solutions. They are the ones providing leadership in this space. And they are telling their ecological, environmental stories, sharing their lived experiences. And with those diverse stories is that we start to get diverse solutions to kind of an ever-evolving kind of complex climate crisis. And those kind of stories that we need are the ones that have hope, that give back our agency and give back our dignity as well. And everyone has a part to play, right? And that includes podcasters like ourselves, right? And our role in this is to preserve those oral traditions, to capture, preserve those stories that's never been possible before, right? I think that's the kind of role that we play here today. So when we bring together, activists, entrepreneurs, writers together, we have podcasters doing complex storytelling of complex systems and solutions. So I'd like to thank Life Sentence, Tabitha Mortiboy. I'd like to thank you, Radio Sabia, Maitek and Daniela. And I'd like to thank Sustainability Simplified, Zatin, to do exactly that, and to put out a question, which is, which eco story will you tell to save the world?